The NFL preseason is officially over, which means the NFL regular season is just around the corner. Every team made a lot of moves in the offseason, so today I thought I'd go over all of them and give each team a grade for their offseason. I'll also be releasing a video here in the near future going over my season predictions, so division winners, award winners, all that kind of stuff, and also crowning who I think will be the Super Bowl champion. For today, let's get straight into it. Starting off with the Buffalo Bills, initially, I'm going to give them a C minus. I think they didn't have a very good offseason. Their wide receiver room is pretty bad. Obviously, the big loss is Stephon Diggs. They traded him to the Texans, didn't get much in return. I do think that moving on from Diggs is a positive thing for the Bills organization because there was just a lot of drama around Stephon Diggs. But at the end of the day, he's a great player, and it's hard to lose your franchise quarterback's number one receiver, he's been that for years now. So it's going to be a big loss, and I think the Bills definitely take a step back this year, especially with how much their team has changed. They lost key players on both sides of the ball. Their defense got much worse, losing guys like Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Tre'Davious White. Those guys were their secondary for years. Those were the guys that took them deep in the playoffs and held their defense strong. And sure, they've had good defensive lines and linebackers, but those core secondary players were the heart and soul of that defense. And losing those guys, I think, is going to be super, super detrimental to this Bills team. Also, this defense remains pretty old still. Their best player is probably still Von Miller, who is, yes, a first ballot Hall of Famer. One of the best edge rushers of all time, of my lifetime. But being realistic, he's old and he's not very good anymore. So this defensive line isn't going to look as good as it did. Obviously, the secondary, they did bring back Taylor Rapp, which I like. They brought in some players, but like all on 1 year cheap deals. But pretty much all they did was re-sign guys and bringing guys on cheap deals. Their offensive line did get better. I think the signing of La'el Collins is really good for this team as long as he stays healthy. Give Josh Allen more time. Let him work with what he has, which isn't much anymore. I do like Curtis Samuel. I think he will fit Josh Allen's play style very well. But I think you're going to see a step back from the Bills this year with how their offseason went, with losing as much as they did and not bringing in as much as they did. So yeah, I think I'm going to give them a C minus. I don't think it's terrible, but I do think that they needed to do more to still be a competitive team, especially in that strong AFC East. Moving on to the Miami Dolphins. I think the Miami Dolphins kind of didn't do much, but they didn't really have to. They were really good last year, and I think they're just going to remain that way. They brought in OBJ, who's going to miss the first 4 weeks of the year, but even though he's old and he's not very good anymore, he doesn't have to be anything for this team. Because when he's your third receiver, OBJ's still going to get open, and he's still going to make plays, and he's going to take the load off of Waddle, who they did extend, and Tyreek Hill, who is probably the best receiver in football, either him or Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, whoever you want, but Tyreek Hill's a monster. They did bring in Jonnu Smith, which could give them some tight end options, which Tua hasn't really had in the past. He had Gesicki, didn't throw to him much, but I like the signing of Jonnu Smith. It's not that bad. Like, there's better tight ends out there, but you don't need a crazy good tight end in Miami when you have the receiver room you do. However, they did lose some really key players on the defensive side of the ball, especially Xavier Howard. Now, they just didn't have the money to bring Xavier Howard back, and they do still have Jalen Ramsey, who is, yes, at the back end of his career, but still a really good player, still a top 10 corner in the league. But the loss of Xavier Howard will affect this defense pretty majorly, I think. And then Jerome Baker, that's a big loss. He's been their franchise middle linebacker since he got into the league. I'm a big fan of Jerome Baker. He's an Ohio State guy, and I think he's a quick, fast player in the run game, and he also has really good covering skills. And then Probably other than Xavier Howard, the other biggest loss is Christian Wilkins. Christian Wilkins has been a game wrecker since he got into the league, and losing a guy like that is near impossible to replace. Their defensive line is still really good with Jalen Phillips, Bradley Chubb, who are both coming off of injuries, but losing a guy like Christian Wilkins is definitely going to put more pressure on those guys, which is going to be tough for them, especially coming off of injury. I also do like Andrew Van Ginkel. I think that's a tough loss. Robert Hunt's a good guard. They lost him. All these receivers aren't really anything. And then they did bring in Kendall Fuller. It's a good signing. I think he's near the back end of his career, but still a good player. And he's not going to replace Xavier Howard, but he will come in and do a good enough job to where the loss of Xavier Howard isn't as major as if you didn't bring him in. Other than that, no big signings. They re-signed Kendall Lamb. Interesting story about him. My very first job, I worked at a Moe's, and Kendall Lamb used to come in when he played for the Browns, and I would talk to him. A very nice guy, great guy. I wish him the best in his career. But yeah, I think the Dolphins, going to give him a B-. It's not that they didn't do good. It's just they lost some key players on the defensive side of the ball. And I think that might make their defense look a little bit worse this year. They're still a playoff team. They're still one of the best teams in the league. That high-powered offense is virtually unstoppable. But they are going to take a bit of a step back, I think, on the defensive side of the ball this year. Moving on to the New England Patriots. New England Patriots, I think, are contenders for one of the worst teams in the league this year. However, I don't mind their offseason. Obviously, Bill Belichick is gone. Gerard Mayo is in. It's going to be some growing pains for the New England Patriots. They re-signed Kendrick Bourne and Ramondre Stevenson. Don't mind it. I think these are just like bridge players that are going to be on your team for the rebuild, but there's really no future there. They signed KJ Osborne. I like that. Re-signed Jalen Reagor. Okay. Re-signed Hunter Henry. All right. Antonio Gibson. Bring Antonio Gibson. Why not? 3 years, $11.25 million. I like it. Antonio Gibson showed sparks of greatness in Washington, but just never really got the chance. They kept bringing other guys in. They kept splitting the backfield. Obviously, he's going into another split backfield, going to a backup role. But Antonio Gibson could give some life to this Patriots offense, which will be pretty bad this year. Obviously, Drake May they brought in the draft. It's a great pick. Probably my favorite quarterback in the draft. But it's going to take some time, especially with the weapons he has, which are none. It's going to take some time for him to develop into a legit NFL quarterback that could be the future of this offense. Now, they did trade Mac Jones. Automatically, that's a letter grade up. I'm going to give him a B. Mac Jones is terrible. So glad that they ended that. Just not a good football player. He was not good with the Patriots. He showed, I guess, shines in his rookie year, but he just was never a good player. And replacing him now with Drake May, I think that's really good for them to just move on from that guy. Get over that and go into a new era of Patriots. I also like the moves they made on the defensive side of the ball. Re-signing Kyle Duggar, who has been great, had a breakout year last year. Re-signed Christian Barmore, who has been good. Re-signed Josh Uche. They did just trade Matt Judon, who has been a great player for the Patriots. Obviously was a Raven in the past. They traded him over to the Falcons. But, again, this team is rebuilding. They're not looking to win this year, and that's what Matt Judon does for you. He's going to make plays to help your defense win, and that's just not what the Patriots are going to do this year. So I think they got good return for him, and it was the right move to move on from him. They signed Sione Takitaki, who obviously has been a Brown for his whole career. I think this is a good move. I mean, he's just a plug-and-play linebacker. He's kind of fits that Patriot culture, hard-working type of guy. Overall, I think the Patriots had a decent offseason for what they're going to be. You know what I mean? They didn't lose too much. They're just rebuilding, and they're going to be bad this year, and they need to acquire draft picks and rebuild through the draft. and that's what they're doing. So I don't mind it. I'm going to give it a B. I think they did a good job. I think the Jets had a pretty good offseason. I'm going to throw them an A minus here. They finally got some O-line help, bringing in Tyron Smith. Now, it's only 1 year, and he is old. He's got to stay healthy. But if he does, that solidifies the left side of that line. They're going to be so much better giving Aaron Rodgers some time to throw the football. Obviously, he only played 4 snaps last year, tore his Achilles, but bringing in offensive line help is just the biggest thing that they needed to do this offseason, and they did it. They lost Mekhi Becton. Now, Mekhi Becton was good at the beginning of his career, but has had so many penalty problems, and it just wasn't working out, and it was just time to say goodbye to him. I like the move. You kind of had to cut ties with him. Maybe he'll be good in the future, but I think it was time for his Jets tenure to end. They lose Bryce Hall and Jordan Whitehead. Those are 2 big losses on the defensive side of the ball in the secondary. Also, Bryce Huff, John Franklin Myers, Quentin Jefferson, 3 key players on that defensive line. The defensive line's still going to be really good. It's just those players did make big impacts last year on a top 5 defense in the NFL. So you have to find replacements. They go ahead and they get Hassan Reddick, who I'm pretty sure wants to be traded, but they said they're not going to trade him. I don't know. Hassan Reddick, that whole situation is very weird, very strange. At the end of the day, I think he'll play, and he'll be very, very good for this defense. And they're still going to be a top 5 defense in the league in my mind. And I think the other thing that they did was that was so key to their offseason is bringing in Mike Williams. Yes, he's made of glass. He gets hurt all the time. But, again, it's another situation of if he stays healthy, that weight taken off of Garrett Wilson's shoulders is insane. They didn't lose much at the receiver position. Randall Cobb retired. Corey Davis is gone. C.J. Uzomah's gone. Whatever. You bring in Mike Williams, a guy who is a lethal pass catcher, can go up and just get the ball, steal it from corners, and if he could stay healthy, that's a huge weapon for Aaron Rodgers this year, not having to only throw the ball to the likes of Garrett Wilson. So I think the Jets did have a great offseason, didn't lose much, and what they lost, I think they replaced pretty well and still have their core of a team. I think the Jets are definitely going to make a run at the AFC East this year. And I like their offseason. So, yeah, A-. Moving on to the AFC North and the Baltimore Ravens. Now, obviously, Derrick Henry is a Raven. I'm not happy about it. But Baltimore fans absolutely should be. It's a huge move. Now, he is coming off of his worst year in his career, which still wasn't very bad. But I think it's obvious that Derrick Henry is getting older and can't kind of be that 30 carry run up the middle guy every single game of the year. He can't do that anymore. He's just not that player anymore. Now he's still a top running back in the league, and putting him in the backfield with Lamar Jackson is going to help him immensely, and that run game is going to be very scary. I'm going to give the Ravens a B+, and a big part of that is Derrick Henry. They did keep Justin Madubuike, who had a career year, was absolutely phenomenal last year, and they did a really good job to maintain him. I think that he definitely could have signed elsewhere, but they did lose some key defensive pieces in the likes of Geno Sohn, Ronald Darby, Rocky Sin. Patrick Queen is probably the biggest one. Jadeveon Clowney's gone. He had a pretty good year with them. They lost some big O-line pieces. Kevin Zeitler, Morgan Moses they traded. Lost Odell Beckham Jr., no more J.K. Dobbins, no more Dalvin Cook. So they did lose some key pieces at key positions, but I think they did a really good job of bringing in guys that are going to help them. They didn't do too much. I think my biggest complaint with the Ravens offseason is you didn't go get a receiver. I think you had to go get a receiver. Zay Flowers can't do everything on his own. You need to help Lamar. He won MVP last year with virtually 0 wide receivers in that room, and if you bring him in, Derrick Henry, and then another good receiver, that offense could be unstoppable. And I think that they failed to do that, and that's a big reason why I'm not giving them an A or an A-. But overall, very good offseason for the Baltimore Ravens. Moving on to the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals didn't have a very good offseason, in my opinion. I'm gonna give it a C minus. They traded Mixon, and now they traded Joe Mixon, and now they bring in Zach Moss, which I don't hate. I'm not a big Joe Mixon guy. Also, he had some off the field problems in Cincinnati. I think it's probably better for him to have a fresh start in Houston. And Zach Moss had a career year last year. I think it's a good replacement, but it's not the biggest deal. T. Higgins gets the franchise tag. That's been drama in Cincinnati for a while now. We'll see what happens with him next year and moving forward. But for now, he is a Bengal. I think potentially this time next year he will not be, but we'll have to see on there. They did lose DJ Reader, which is a huge, huge loss for that defensive line. Obviously going to the Lions. That's tough for the Bengals. Lose out on Tyler Boyd, who is somebody they love to use. They bring in Jermaine Burton instead, which is a fine replacement. I think Jermaine Burton's a good player. Good wide receiver 3 for that offense. Bring back Von Belly, played in Carolina last year, Ohio State guy, back in Cincinnati. I just don't think the Bengals did much. They didn't do anything to make their team better, and after the year they had last year, I feel like they had to. Obviously, Burrow will come back healthy, and we'll see how that works out. But I think they had to get better this offseason, and they didn't. They didn't lose too much, but they didn't get better. I said C minus. I think I'm going to give them a C, actually. Not too bad, but nothing crazy, nothing too important. Moving on to my favorite team, the Cleveland Browns. Now, this one might be a little bit longer because I have a lot to say about my Brownies. Now, they didn't lose anything crazy. Sione is a tough loss for this team. He was a big piece on that defense when you needed him to be. Anthony Walker's gone. That's fine. We brought in a big replacement. Mike Ford went to the Texans, but is back again. I'm pretty sure I just saw that. He's a special teams player. He's a really good special teamer. Nothing big. Nick Harris went to the Seahawks. Just kidding. He's back. So it's another funny one. Jordan Elliott to the Niners. Actually like that move for the Niners. We lose out on Joe Flacco, but here's what we bring in. We bring in Tyler Huntley, who I think will be traded in the next couple of days. And then we bring in Jameis Winston to be our backup. Now, obviously, quarterback is up in the air for the Cleveland Browns, as much as it hurts to say. Deshaun just hasn't been good enough. Now, he was good enough to win 5 games last year, 5-1. He just needed the defense to do what they did, and I don't know if that's going to happen again this year. The defense is still going to be great, probably the best defense in the NFL, but it's bound to take a step back. And Deshaun's going to have to make up for that step back with his play on the field. We haven't seen him play at all in the preseason. Nothing from him. So it's still up in the air on how good Deshaun's going to look. But you did bring in Jerry Jeudy in a trade with the Broncos to help Deshaun out, which I think is a great move. Like, Jerry Jeudy has not been what everybody thought he was going to be in the NFL. Absolutely, for sure. But he's still been a solid wide receiver, and he's coming into a team that is good. He's really never played for a good Broncos team, and he's finally on a good team with a veteran quarterback that can make the throws. Now, again, I said it's up in the air, but you can't deny that Deshaun can make the throws. He just has to be on. And I think Jerry Jeudy's going to help him a lot with being on, and he's going to be able to make a lot of those throws. I love the addition of Jerry Jeudy. I don't know if I said, but I am giving the Browns an A-. I think that they upgraded the linebacker room. You re-signed Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah to an extension. You didn't re-sign him, but you extended Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah, which is a massive, massive extension. He was awesome last year, Pro Bowler. In my opinion, one of the best linebackers in football. You bring back Zadarius Smith. Such a good move. You needed to either replace Zadarius Smith or bring him back. You bring him back. I love that move. Takes the pressure off of Miles. You bring back those key defensive linemen you had last year in Shelby Harris and Mo Hurst that were so good down the stretch. I know Mo Hurst got hurt, but they were so good down the stretch and were crucial to us making a playoff run. You bring in Quentin Jefferson, who's coming off the best year of his career at 6 sacks last year with the Jets. You bring in Devin Bush, who was terrible last year and has not been good for a while, but was a first round pick. There is potential there. He looked really good in the preseason. He's going to be a rotational linebacker when guys need to come off the field to take a rest. I love the move. Jordan Hicks, he's going to be your new Anthony Walker. I think it's a great move. Jordan Hicks is a veteran linebacker, been with the Minnesota Vikings for a long time now. I think JOK is going to get the green dot, but Jordan Hicks will be really good right beside him. And overall, I just think the Browns did a lot of good things. Now, the one thing that is scary is the running back room. Nick Chubb starting the year on the PUP list, so he's going to miss at least 4 weeks. You brought in Naheem Hines, who is also starting the year on IR because of that freak jet ski accident. And then you brought in Deonta Foreman, who we cut at the 53-man roster. And I think once you trade Tyler Huntley, Deonta Foreman will be back. But as of right now, at 2:25 p.m. on August 28th, the Browns have 2 running backs on roster, Jerome Ford and Pierre Strong. And Pierre Strong is banged up. So you really have 1 running back on your roster. You have to do something about that. Obviously, they will, but it's a little scary as of right now. But overall, yes, I do like the Browns offseason. Moving on to the Pittsburgh Steelers. The Steelers got really, really busy in the offseason, and there's a lot to break down. Overall, as much as it pains me, I do think I have to give the Steelers an A because their offseason was really good. They bring in Russell Wilson, who has just not been good since he's been in Seattle, but they also bring in Justin Fields. So that quarterback room is just going to be interesting. I think that eventually Justin Fields will win that job. However, as much as I do love Justin Fields as a Buckeye, I don't think either of these guys are going to be the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I think Justin Fields is going to bounce around a little bit more in his career. I don't know if he will ever find his spot. It's very unfortunate to say, but I do think that neither of these guys are the future of the Pittsburgh Steelers. They got rid of some pretty bad players. I think they did really well. Patrick Peterson was old and not very good. Allen Robinson, good riddance. Deontay Johnson, good riddance. Although, I mean, he's a good player, but just wasn't doing anything for you. Got rid of Kenny Pickett. About time. He's terrible. All 3 of these quarterbacks are terrible, and you just moved on from them. They did all the right things that you were kind of scared they wouldn't do. You think that they would be content and keep trying what they've been trying, and they said, no, we're getting rid of these guys that have not been good. We're, moving on, and we're going to rebuild. And I'm always okay with rebuilding. Now, they still could be good this year because of how good their defense is and has been. And especially bringing in a guy like Patrick Queen, 3 years, $41 million. Bringing him away from a team in your division, in the Ravens, who are really, really good, and bringing him over to your defense, going to make your defense so much better. And it was already awesome, and it's been awesome. Now, you didn't really make any big moves anywhere else. None on the offensive side of the ball. That receiver room is going to be terrible. Now, maybe Brandon Ayuk ends up there. Brandon Ayuk has been a crazy, crazy player this offseason. He was guaranteed to be a Steeler, and then it was between the Patriots and the Browns, and then neither team was getting him, and then he was going to be a 49er, and now a week and a half, 2 weeks later, he's either a 49er or a Steeler. Whatever. I mean, if they do get Brandon Ayuk, this team is obviously better. They're still not anywhere near winning the division, in my opinion. I still think they're rebuilding, at least on the offensive side of the football, because quarterback is just a big question mark. However, they did have a really good offseason. I'm going to give it an A. One of the better off seasons of any team in the NFL, which obviously pains me to say as a Browns fan. But I do really like the direction this team went in getting rid of what didn't work and trying to bring in something new that also might not work, but it's worth a chance. And I think that the front office treated it in a very, very good way. So yeah, now moving to the AFC South and the Houston Texans. This is my first A+. I think the Houston Texans were awesome last year. The surprise of the NFL. And the offseason, they said, all right, now we're going to be a force to be reckoned with. Bringing in Joe Mixon, they have their solidified running back now. And then bringing in Stephon Diggs, who, yes, has not been good as of late. I don't care. He's Stephon Diggs. And you are now giving CJ Stroud probably the best receiver room in football. Stephon Diggs, Nico Collins, who had a breakout year last year, and Tank Dell, who's coming off of injury, but when he was healthy, showed that he was CJ Stroud's favorite target all year. So I think that this team is going to be scary. They re-signed Dalton Schultz, who was a very good tight end for CJ last year. And they bring in Danielle Hunter, which is so sick. Danielle Hunter has been one of the best edge rushers in the league for a while now. He just kind of goes under the radar playing for the Vikings. I think he led the league in TFLs last year. And putting him on the other side of Will Anderson Jr. is going to be so scary for opposing offenses. They're just going to dominate on every side of the ball. I mean, look at it. You've got a fantastic offensive line, a fantastic defensive line. Your secondary is really good. Your linebackers are really good. They showed out in that playoff game against the Browns last year. And your receiver room is awesome. You have a good running back now, and you have one of the best young quarterbacks in the NFL. They really just brought in so many sick players. Jeff Okudah, he's a Buckeye. Former number 3 overall pick. Can't hurt just bringing him in. Desmond King re-signed. C.J. Henderson was the second quarterback drafted in that Jeff Okudah class. Another young guy who was drafted really high that there's just no problem with bringing in a young guy. And I'm not sure if they made the team, but the point still stands that they're really good additions. Now, Jonathan Grenard is a tough loss for this team. He went over to the Vikings. They bring in Danielle Hunter. Danielle Hunter's a better player by a mile. It's not even close. Sheldon Rankins, tough loss. Malik Collins. They did lose some tough players, Thierry Tart. But at the end of the day, the players they lost, they brought in better players to replace them. This team is scary, scary, scary. One of the best teams in the NFL, as long as CJ stays hot and proves that he is a legit great NFL quarterback. And it wasn't just a 1-year great rookie year, which I don't think it was. So yeah, A+ for the Texans. Great offseason. Moving on to the Indianapolis Colts. Now, this is a little bit goofy. They didn't lose anything. Zach Moss obviously had a great year. Gardner Minshew also had a great year. Isaiah McKenzie, whatever. Jake Martin, whatever. They lost 4 players. I don't know how that's even possible. Now, they probably lost more, but those are the notable players. Bring back DeForest Buckner. There was a lot of talk about DeForest Buckner not coming back. And they bring in Joe Flacco, who, with Anthony Richardson looking like he might be a bit injury prone with the way he runs with the football, Joe Flacco can win you games. He literally proved it last year with the Browns. I like the signing. They bring in Trey Sermon, who is an Ohio State guy and is a good player and a good backup to Jonathan Taylor, who has had some injury concerns in the past. I'm going to give the Colts a B-. Bring in Raekwon Davis. They just brought in some really good players at positions they needed those players at, and they re-signed the guys that they liked, and they didn't lose anything. It's just, I'm actually going to give him a B, not a B-. I'll give him a B. Not a crazy offseason, no big moves, which does bring it down for me, because they did need to get better, looking as how much better the Texans did. If they want to compete, they have to compete with the Texans. They didn't do enough to compete with the Texans, and that's why I would give them a B and not like an A for bringing in some good players at positions of need. But overall, it's still a good offseason. B for the Colts. Moving on to Jacksonville, who I think had not too great of a offseason. I'm going to give them a C+. Now, they did bring in some good players, but it's the same thing with the Colts, except this team was better than the Colts and competing for the division. And now with Houston bringing in so many better players, you had to bring in some good players to compete with Houston this year, and they're just so much worse than Houston on paper. They did have some good signings, but they also had some big losses. Calvin Ridley, now obviously it didn't really work out, but I still think it's a pretty big loss. Caleb Von Chason was a good defensive lineman for them. Foley Fatuski, I can't say it, but it's like Fatukasi, and Dwayne Smoot, all good players on the defensive side of the ball. And they didn't really bring in anything crazy. They re-signed Foyesana Aluakon. Good re-signing. I did forget that they did bring in Eric Armstead. That's a pretty sick signing. That he's going to be a game record for them on the inside, in the interior of the defensive line. But they didn't really bring in any good secondary players. They re-signed, or not re-signed. Sorry, they signed Gabe Davis, which is a cool weapon for Trevor Lawrence. They did draft Brian Thomas Jr., which I love. Obviously, they traded for Mac Jones just to be a backup to T-Law, who they did extend, which obviously is a good move. But overall, they just didn't get good enough to compete with Houston, in my opinion. And that's what you have to do in this division now, is compete with Houston, because Houston got really, really good. So I think it's Houston's division to lose, and I think Jacksonville takes a big step back this year from them being a pretty good team in the past. Moving on to the Tennessee Titans. Now, obviously, the big one is that Derrick Henry is gone. The Derrick Henry era is over in Tennessee, and I'm not sure that's such a bad thing. I think that Tennessee has been so one-dimensional for so long now with Derrick Henry that maybe it's going to open him up to try new things, to maybe work out new quarterbacks. Will Levis, I'm not sure, is the guy, but you're going to give him a chance to throw the ball, and it's not going to be run all the time now, which I'm totally fine with. You did lose Aziz Al-Shaair to the Texans. I didn't even mention it with the Texans, but that's a sick pickup for them, and a pretty bad loss for the Titans. Sean Murphy-Bunting, good player. You lose him. They did cut Caleb Farley, who's their former first-round pick corner. He never worked out in Tennessee with injuries and all of that kind of stuff. Now they bring in Tony Pollard, which I think is a good change of pace for the Tennessee Titans. You're not bringing in a guy you're going to hand the ball off 30 times a game. You're bringing in a guy who is going to catch passes off the backfield. You're going to get to the edge. He's going to try and run around and run past people, and he's going to get 20 carries a game. And I think that's a big change of pace for this team, moving towards maybe more of a pass-centric or a balanced offense rather than so run-heavy. Lloyd Cushenberry, really good center. You bring him in, gonna bolster up that offensive line that has been very bad recently. You signed Calvin Ridley to a 4-year deal. Now, you massively overpaid this player. He's been good in the past, but has not been good since the suspension. Was pretty bad last year. And it could be a big positive. D-Hop on one side, Calvin Ridley on the other. That wide receiver room could be very good. It's just, I don't think it was worth the money. And especially when you're looking like one of the bottom 2 teams in your division, why go out and get a veteran receiver for a lot of money who wasn't very good last year, especially when you have question marks at the quarterback position? I don't know. I just don't love it. I'm giving the Titans a C. I think that they had a fine offseason, but losing Derrick Henry is just so big that you can't really rank them higher, because you haven't seen what the team looks like without Derrick Henry. It's just been all about Derrick Henry for so long that it's hard to say what they're going to be like. Also, sorry, L'Jarius Sneed. Huge pickup. Great pickup for this defense. L'Jarius Sneed is awesome. One of the better corners in the league. I love that pickup for the Titans. It's a big loss for the Chiefs. Moving on to the AFC West, we have the Denver Broncos. It's a D. This team is going to suck. Like, this team is going to be bad, okay? Draft Bo Nix, which I think was just an overdraft at 12. I don't think Bo Nix is that good. He had a decent preseason, but at the end of the day, Bo Nix is just not going to have a good season in his rookie year in the NFL. He's also old. It's just, it's not going to work, in my opinion. I just don't like it. But they trade for Zach Wilson, which is whatever. It's a new start for Zach Wilson. Could be good. Who knows? Probably not, but there is potential there. It's a whatever move. He's not going to start. It's Bo Nix's job. So I don't know. It's again, it's a lot of nothing. They lose Russell Wilson, and they're eating a ton of money with losing Russell Wilson, which is just bad. Like they're a lot of money they're eating from this. And then Jerry Jeudy, they lost obviously to the Browns. That's a big loss, but it's a fine loss. He never really worked out in Denver, and he needed a fresh start. It wasn't going to work out on this new horrible team they're going to have. So it's good that they get him out of here. Justin Simmons, big loss. Lloyd Cushenberry, really good center. Josie Jewell, pretty good player. They lose out on those guys. They bring in John Franklin Myers in a trade. I like that for them. But it's just a lot of bad. I mean, when you're re-signing Lil Jordan Humphrey, your team stinks. God, I don't know how to tell it. The Broncos are going to be pretty bad this year. Number one pick contenders. This team's gonna suck. They just didn't do anything. It's a D for me. On to the Kansas City Chiefs, who I just mentioned. Big loss in L'Jarius Sneed. They're the reigning Super Bowl champions, so you can't really be too hard on them because all they do is win. And it's tough to be upset at some of their offseason moves when you just feel like no matter what, they're going to be good. But it is a really tough loss in L'Jarius Sneed. Willie Gay is a tough loss as well. Donovan Smith really wasn't great as a Chief, but it still can end up being a pretty tough loss. MVS, whatever, Jerick McKinnon, whatever. They like to use him, but it's kind of whatever. And then obviously they bring back Travis Kelce or extend him, re-sign Clyde. I mean, they just didn't do much, except I do like the move of signing Hollywood Brown. This could be your Tyreek type player. Either him or their first-round draft pick in Xavier Worthy. These are your Tyreek-type replacement players that could finally give this receiver room some identity. Patrick Mahomes has been doing all of this stuff with a just terrible receiver room. He's been winning Super Bowls and all of this stuff with a horrible receiver room. And now finally, the receiver room could have some identity. You bring in Irv Smith to be a good backup tight end to Travis Kelce. And then you re-sign Chris Jones to a massive contract, 5 years, $158 million, with 101 of it guaranteed. It's a huge contract for an older player, but I don't really care. He's one of the best defensive players in the league. It's very, very, very good for them. Now, the one thing that they didn't do is get anything on the offensive line, which was already not so great last year. Their offensive line does scare me. But at the end of the day, Mahomes gets some big weapons on the offensive side of the football, and that's really big for this team. And I think they're going to continue their greatness and be a force to be reckoned with for the foreseeable future. Moving on to the Las Vegas Raiders. They bring in Gardner Minshew, who has been named the starter. Will start for the Raiders at least at the beginning of the year. This team's going to get a C- for me. Just didn't do much. They bring in Christian Wilkins, which is the signing of the offseason for them. Signed Michael Gallup for him to retire. And yeah, Christian Wilkins, the signing of the offseason for them, 4 years, $110 million, $84 million guaranteed. That's a pretty massive contract. But he is a really great player. And putting him on a defensive line with Max Crosby can be very, very scary. But they did lose some key players, not in Jimmy Garoppolo. He was not the future, but Josh Jacobs. Josh Jacobs has pretty much been a really solid player for this team ever since he came into the league. And now it's Zamir White's job, which I think he's going to be good, but I just don't know how good he'll be. You know, I just don't. He's not going to be Josh Jacobs, and it's a pretty big loss for this offense, especially when you don't have much of an identity already. You brought in Brock Bowers in the draft, which I really do like. But I do think this team is going to struggle a lot this year, and I could see a player like Devontae Adams being moved at the deadline. You bring in Alexander Madison to back up Zamir White. I could see them splitting the backfield a tiny bit, although I do really think it's Zamir White's job. Yeah, overall, you really didn't do much. Christian Wilkins is a big signing. That defensive line is going to be really, really good, especially Tyree Wilson, always also on that line. He's super young and could develop into a really good player, but it's just not what I would like to have seen from the Raiders. I would have liked them to either go full rebuild or try and win games, and it felt like they kind of went in the middle, and it doesn't make very much sense to me. So yeah, I'm going to give them a C minus, and we're gonna move on to the Los Angeles Chargers, who had an even worse deadline not deadline, off season in my opinion. I'm gonna give them a D. It's the most head scratching free agency to me, or at like it's the most head scratching off season to me by far, because the Chargers have been pretty good on paper for the past couple of years, but overall their defense has not worked and their offense has. So what did they do? They blew up their offense and kept the defense together. It doesn't make any sense to me. You lose Austin Eckler, he was terrible last year, but whatever. You trade Keenan Allen. I mean, I just don't get it. Why are you moving these offensive players like Keenan Allen, not re-signing Mike Williams? Why are you saying goodbye to these offensive players when you still have a top 10 quarterback in the league in Justin Herbert? Why are you not blowing up the defense and making some moves on the defensive side of the ball and trying to rebuild there when you already have your offensive set in stone? Now I get it that that Mike Williams now I get that Mike Williams and Keenan Allen are on the older side. It just still doesn't make any sense to me. You really didn't bring in anyone offensively that is going to make any big changes for you this offseason. You really didn't bring in any receiver. Bring in DJ Chark. Who cares? You draft Lab McConkey, which, all right, whatever. It could be good. He's a really good player. It's just he's not a number one wide receiver in the league. Quentin Johnston obviously isn't a number one wide receiver in the league. Your number one wide receiver this year is Josh Palmer. That's pretty bad. So I just don't see this offense thriving, and it just doesn't make any sense to me why they would blow up the offense and not blow up the defense. Now they sign Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, just bringing in that old injury-ridden Ravens backfield for their own now to replace Austin Eckler. It's whatever to me. I just don't think this team had a good offseason at all. Now moving on to the NFC, starting with the NFC East and the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys off-season was horrendous. For as good of a team as they are, I have it written down to give them a D. I'm giving them an F. This team is way too good for you to do absolutely nothing in the offseason. No. First off, very sad with Leighton Vander Esch forced to retire over medical reasons. Really good player. Just had to retire. It's very upsetting. One of my favorite linebackers in the league. You lose Dorrance Armstrong, who was a really good edge rusher for you. Same thing with Dante Fowler Jr. But the running back room is what makes no sense to me. You lose Tony Pollard. Okay, fine. You feel like you have to go get a running back. There's plenty of free agency that you can go get and feel good with going into the year. Instead, you bring back an old Ezekiel Elliott, who has proven that he is just not the player he used to be, and you re-sign Rico Dowdle. What are you doing? You have no run game this year at all. And then you also lose your best lineman. Now, the line's still going to be good, but you lose your best lineman in Tyron Smith. Tyler Biotish is a big loss, too. Their line, again, still going to be good, but they didn't bring in anyone to replace those guys. You bring in Eric Kendricks, old, not very good. You didn't make a single move this offseason, at least a single important move. You're the Dallas Cowboys. Like, that's what you do. You bring in big players. You didn't do it this offseason, and they're going to be worse this year because of it. They're still going to be good, but they could have been great. And this offseason just kept them good to okay, and I don't understand at all what that front office was thinking during this offseason, not wanting to spend any money, not wanting to make any moves. Doesn't make any sense to me. Now, I know they re-signed CeeDee Lamb to that massive contract, but I don't like it at all from the Cowboys. Moving on to the New York Giants, which is a really weird free agency for me. There's been some weird ones, but yeah, this one's the weirdest. Now, Brian Burns. You bring Brian Burns in. This is a sick, sick, sick addition, especially on the other side of Kayvon Thibodeau. Your defensive line is now really, really, really good. But obviously, you lose out on Saquon Barkley. He's been the face of your team for how long now? It's weird because I don't know if they're with this offseason. I don't know if they're trying to lose or if they're trying to win because you're bringing in a really, really sick defensive player. You're bringing in the offensive lineman that you've needed for so long. You're bringing in players that you've needed to bring in. But on the other side of it, you're losing the face of your franchise in Saquon Barkley. It makes no sense to me. You're losing Xavier McKinney, a key piece on your defense, to a really good team in the Packers. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me what they were trying to do here. Darren Waller retires. Not the biggest loss for them. But yeah, it's just weird. Now, I think this team is going to be terrible. Daniel Jones does not look good since he's been back in this preseason. And there's just no one to throw the ball to. Now, obviously, Malik Neighbors is a great, great pickup in the draft, but it's going to take some time for Malik Neighbors to look really good in the NFL because he has no one throwing him the football. So this offseason, I'm going to give it a B- because I really, really, really love Brian Burns, but it's like, why are you letting Saquon Barkley walk? And especially to the Philadelphia Eagles, a division rival who are up next, who are going to get a B+ from me. Actually, I'm going to give the Giants a C. I said B-, giving them a C. Bad offseason. I do like Brian Burns a lot, but the Eagles. Now, you're bringing in Saquon Barkley. This is huge. Like, it's super sick. You re-sign A.J. Brown, who had some weird offseason things where you thought maybe he was going to leave, but you bring him back. And you bring in Saquon, which is going to open up that offense a ton because now you're not just going to have to be so pass heavy. You can run some options with Jalen Hurts and Saquon. You can throw to Saquon out of the backfield. You can run a lot of play action to threaten Saquon running the ball, and then take the top off the defense with guys like Devonta Smith and A.J. Brown. So I think that offense improved a lot. Now, you did lose Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox to retirement. Even though those guys are old, they were still Pro Bowl caliber players at the end of their career. So those are some pretty sizable losses for the Eagles here. Lose Kevin Byard, Bradley Roby. Some of these players aren't as big of losses. And I really do think that the only players that they lost in the offseason that are a big deal are Hassan Reddick, Fletcher Cox, and Jason Kelce. But those are super significant losses. You do bring in C.J. Gardner-Johnson, who has been good. Obviously, has a big mouth on him, and a lot of players around the NFL don't like him. But at the end of the day, he's a really good player. Like, he's a solid safety / corner. It's going to help this team out a lot. You bring in Cooper DeJean in the second round. That's going to help your team out a lot. I love Cooper DeJean a lot. I think he's a corner. Everybody thinks he's going to move to safety. I think he's a corner. I really do. He has the athleticism to play the position, and I think he's going to play it well in the NFL. You bring in Bryce Huff. This is your Hassan Reddick replacement, and I do like it. Bryce Huff is a really good player for the Jets these last couple of years, and I do think it's going to fill that hole of Hassan Reddick leaving. You bring in Landon Dickerson, really good guard. Mekhi Becton restarting his career in Philadelphia now. I do think the offensive line is still going to look pretty good, even with Kelce gone. And this team overall had a pretty good offseason. How could you not when you bring in one of the league's best in Saquon Barkley? So it's a B+ for me. Moving on to the Washington Commanders. This team also had a pretty weird offseason. I can't really tell what direction this front office is trying to go with this team. It feels like they still should be bad, but they brought in players that feel like they're trying to be good. It doesn't make sense. They bring in Eckler for a 2-year deal. He's just not so good anymore. He's in his 30s. He's just not the player he was a few years ago. Now maybe he can have a bounce back year. I definitely think that's possible, but it's just not. He's not your franchise running back anymore like he was for the Chargers. Him and Brian Robinson going to split those carries. I do think it could be a decent backfield, and then obviously you bring in Jaden Daniels in the draft, number 2 pick overall, and I'm not very high on him, but he could still be a really great NFL quarterback. And I think that having players like this around him could be very beneficial. I don't think this team will be good, but I think that they will be not one of the worst. I think they're going to be last in the division, maybe second to last. The Giants are going to suck, but yeah, they do. They bring in a guy like Dorrance Armstrong. They make this defensive line better. However, they got rid of Chase Young, Montez Sweat, which were way better than what they brought in this offseason. So it did get worse. They trade Sam Howell to the Seahawks. I think it's whatever. They gave up on him pretty quick, but he wasn't great. Lose Curtis Samuel. That's a pretty tough loss in my opinion. You really didn't bring in anyone to replace him, so it's still just the Terry McLaurin, Jahan Dotson type show. You lose Kendall Fuller, which is a pretty big loss. Cameron Curl is gone. He's with the Rams. I think that's also a pretty big loss for that defense. Bringing Dante Fowler. These guys, he's just old. You know, Frankie Louvu, really great player. I love that signing. Bobby Wagner, another one that's kind of a head scratcher. What are we doing? Bobby Wagner's old and not very good anymore. Again, much like Von Miller, first ballot Hall of Famer, but old, kind of washed up. You bring in Jeremy Chin. Now, it's only 1 year, but this is a really good Cameron Curl replacement. I love Jeremy Chin. I think he's a really sick player, and I think it's a really good replacement. I think it's just, again, confusing because I don't really know what direction this team is going. Are they going to be good? Are they going to be bad? I think they're going to be bad, but are they trying to be good is my question, and that's what I don't really understand because they did make a lot of moves in the offseason. So, yeah. Just a B minus for the Commanders. I just don't love it too much, but they did get some good players. Moving on to the NFC North, we do have the Chicago Bears to start. Now, the Bears is an interesting issue offseason. Obviously, number 1 pick in the draft, you take Caleb Williams, probably the best player on the board, and you get rid of Justin Fields. Super polarizing. I think it could go either way on what you think about it, but at the end of the day, I think it's an A minus for the Bears. You bring in DeAndre Swift, who's a really solid running back. You finally have a good run game, I think, in Chicago, and it's going to take a lot of weight off of Caleb's shoulders, and that's going to be super helpful because he has a lot of weapons to take off his shoulders too, because you acquire Keenan Allen for a 4th-round pick. That's super sick. So your receiver room is going to look like DJ Moore, Keenan Allen, and then 1st-round pick Rome Odunze. That's one of the best receiver rooms in the league right now, and it's going to help out a rookie quarterback coming in right away. Now, I think, like every rookie quarterback does, Caleb's going to have his growing pains, but with that room and with that team, it's going to help a lot. And their defense is also going to be pretty good. They bring in Kevin Byard, Jonathan Owens, 2 good safeties. They re-signed Jalen Johnson, who's great. They still have Montez Sweat in that trade from last year. This team's going to be pretty good. It's going to be an A minus for me. They lose Deonta Foreman, whatever. Darnell Mooney, whatever. Never really found his footing in Chicago. Good player, but never really found his footing here. Cody Whitehair, that's a pretty significant loss. But other than that, nothing really crazy in the loss department. So I think the Bears had a really good offseason and are going to make some noise in that division. I don't think maybe right away. I think it might take them a year or two. But eventually I think they're going to be up there competing to win that division. The Detroit Lions obviously start off with extending Jared Goff, which I think is a really good move. I think he earned that. You also extend Amon-Ra St. Brown. You're extending your key players, and then you bring in DJ Reader, which is a super sick get. Overall, you did lose some really solid players, though. CJ Gardner-Johnson, Will Harris, Romeo Okwara did retire. So you lost some key players, Jonah Jackson. You did bring in some players to kind of replace those players. Kevin Zeitler is a good get. You extend Penei Sewell. But overall, I think I would have liked to see the Lions do a little bit more. It's still a B for me. They're still going to be really good, and I do think they did make some nice moves. But if they're trying to get over that hump and play in a Super Bowl, I think they needed to go out and do something a little bit more significant, which they did not do. But I do trust in Dan Campbell, and I do trust that this team will be very good again this year. So I think that maybe they're like, let's run it back. Let's not change much about what we already had, and let's get more familiar with each other as a team, and that's what will get us over the hump. So overall, I do like it. It's a B for me, and we're gonna move on to the Green Bay Packers now. You lose Aaron Jones. It's another crazy running back free agency team. Lose Aaron Jones has been your star running back forever now, but you bring in Josh Jacobs, who is really, really good, maybe even better than Aaron Jones. So you stay good at running back, and you bring in the best free agent safety on the market in Xavier McKinney. It's going to be an A minus for the Packers. They really didn't do much. They lose Jonathan Owen and Darnell Savage, which are their key safeties, but they bring in the best safety on the market. So it really is a good addition for them. They didn't do much, but again, they got better. You lose David Bakhtiari, who wasn't playing anyways because he's always hurt. So I don't know. I would have liked to see them do maybe a little bit more on the offensive line. But at the end of the day, really good free agency for the Packers. Not too much to say here because they didn't do too much. But they got better. And in a division that's going to be highly competitive, getting better is what you have to do. And I think they did that. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings. Now, you bring in a division rival's running back in Aaron Jones, who's really good. You extend Justin Jefferson, which is obviously key. But Sam Darnold's your starter. You draft J.J. McCarthy. He tears his ACL. He's out for the year. Obviously, you couldn't have planned that. Now, I don't like the J.J. McCarthy pick really much anyways, and that's not just because I'm an Ohio State fan. I just don't think he's your franchise quarterback. He didn't do enough in college to prove himself to be drafted as high as he did and take charge of an NFL team right away. I think he's a very talented player and could do a lot on the ground. I just don't know if he can make all the throws. But yeah, the Kirk Cousins era is officially over, and it feels like you're rebuilding because you lose guys like Anthony Barr, Joseph Hicks, some guys you've had for a long time, Daniil Hunter, DJ Wanham. These are guys that have been with the team for a long time, and you feel like you need to rebuild when you lose that much of key players, but you also feel like you have to compete because you have players on the offensive side of the ball like Justin Jefferson and feel like you have to compete though because you have players on the offensive side of the ball like Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison who are such star playmakers that you feel like you're good enough to compete with the best of them. You bring in Andrew Van Ginkel and Jonathan Grenard. These are some good signings. It's a good replacement for Daniil Hunter, but not as good, right? Daniil Hunter was the heart and soul of your defense for so long now. It's a tough loss. So overall, I'm going to give him a C. It's just a very weird offseason for me. I think that they definitely got worse, but there's not much they could have prevented from getting worse with losing Kirk Cousins. It's just a tough offseason for the Vikings. I still think they can be good with Sam Darnold at quarterback, but it's going to be a tough year for the Vikings. You know, I think they're going to be at the bottom of the division. Maybe the Bears, have growing pains and aren't as good as people think they could be. Could come last, but I think the clear preseason worst team in the division are the Minnesota Vikings with no quarterback. Alrighty, moving on to the NFC South and the Atlanta Falcons, which is Kirk Cousins' new home. Now, I'm gonna give them a B+. You bring in Big Kirko, and this is what the Falcons have needed for so long since the Matt Ryan era and when he fell off. You finally bring in your quarterback, which is Kirk Cousins. Now you draft Michael Penix. I've gone over this. Why? He's old. He's not that good. You draft him at 8th overall, and you sign Kirk Cousins to a 4-year deal. Why are you drafting Michael Penix? But regardless, they bring in some fun receiver. Regardless, they bring in some fun Receivers, Rondell Moore unfortunately will miss out on the season. That would have been a really sick player for them, but I do like Darnell Mooney a lot. Again, couldn't find his footing in Chicago, but with this new offense, with good players around him and a great quarterback, Darnell Mooney could be a really good third receiver option in this offense. Third, second receiver option, with obviously Drake London in front of him. And they didn't really do much else, but they revamped the offense, and that's what they had to do. They lose Jeff Okuda, Calais Campbell, who's old, Bud Dupree, who's old, Jonnu Smith, who's kind of old, Cordell Patterson, who's old. They lose all of these old players, and they bring in some other old players, but they definitely got better on the offensive side of the ball. They didn't do much on the defensive side of the ball, but they do bring in a defensive-minded coach, which I think is going to help them out a lot. So yeah, B plus for the Falcons. I think they had a good offseason. Moving on to the Carolina Panthers. Much like the Broncos, this team is going to stink. They're terrible. I'm going to give it a D. They lost their two best defensive players in Jeremy Chin and obviously Brian Burns. Now I get your rebuilding. They also lose Frankie Louvu, who is another one of their best defensive players, Von Bell. They lost a lot. C.J. Henderson to the Texans. They lost a lot of what made them almost okay last year, and now there's just a whole lot of nothing. Bryce Young going into his second year. Who knows what he's going to look like? I think he'll be better than he was last year for sure, but he's still not going to be great with the team he has around him. The offensive line still kind of stinks. You bring in Deontay Johnson, which I think is like a good target to bring in for Bryce Young. Like I think it's fun for him to grow with a player like this. But at the end of the day, they're still going to stink. Robert Hunt, 5-year, $100 million. This is a good signing for the interior of the offensive line. Damian Lewis, another good signing for the interior offensive line. So you're protecting Bryce Young, which I think is really good. And then you just brought in some old defensive players while you just tank for, high picks. Jordan Fuller, player I really love. But yeah, it's just a bad offseason. The Panthers are going to stink once again. Another first overall pick contender, which I don't know what they're going to do because obviously they're not going to go quarterback. So we'll see. I don't know. It's an interesting year for the Panthers. I think they're in a pretty tough spot. Moving on to the New Orleans Saints. This is another D for me. They're in cap hell. I think they have the worst cap. They're in the worst cap position in all of the NFL. Now they bring in Chase Young. This could turn around his career. Who knows? Playing for another bad team. I think it's another player that could be traded at the deadline. You signed a 2-year contract for Tyrann Mathieu. I love Tyrann Mathieu. He's just old. And same thing with Willie Gay. It just, I don't know. Demario Davis, another old player. They just didn't do anything to make their team better. Didn't bring in any receivers. Their offense is going to suck. Derek Carr is terrible. Now you didn't lose too much. Jameis is gone. Michael Thomas, he hasn't done anything in years. You didn't lose much, but you didn't bring in anything. You just didn't do anything. So it's just and especially in a division that is so winnable for you. I hate how the Saints treated this offseason. I think they're a bottom 10 team in the league. And yeah, it's a D. It's one of the worst off seasons for sure. Okay, moving on to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm gonna give them a B plus. I love me some Baker Mayfield. Obviously, as a big Browns fan, I love Baker Mayfield. Love to see his career turn around in Tampa Bay here, and I love that they're re-signing him to a 3-year extension. They bring in Bryce Hall, who's been really good for the Jets. So that's a big defensive addition. They re-signed Mike Evans, which is something they had to do, and they did it. It's a big thing where it's like, it's an obvious move, but you're scared that the team's not going to do it. And they did it. So it's a big plus. Hopefully he remains a career Buck. The 1,000-yard merchant. Just love Mike Thomas. Not Mike Thomas. Mike Evans. How could you not? Antoine Winfield Jr., they bring him back. Jordan Whitehead, it's a good addition. They did some pretty good things on both sides of the ball, I think, whether it be re-signing or bringing in new players. Shaq Barrett, he's super old, but it is a tough loss Devin White, that's a super tough loss. Carlton Davis, not too tough of a loss. Ryan Jensen retiring is not very good, but overall, it's a B plus. I think they had a good offseason in the sense that they did what they had to do to maintain staying at the top of the division, and that's all you could really ask for at times. Obviously, I don't think they're Super Bowl contenders or did enough to do anything like that, but they did maintain a good enough roster to where they're still at the top of their division. Now the Falcons are, I think, right on their tail and could steal it from them, but the Bucs are still definitely a top team in that division. Moving on to finally the NFC West and the Arizona Cardinals. It's very similar to a lot of other teams. They just brought in a lot of guys that won't make big impacts because they're not very good. Not the players, I mean the team. The team is just not very good, so they're bringing in a lot of players that maybe they're going to try out, and it's just not working out. They did cut Desmond Ridder. They acquired him in a trade for Rondale Moore, and they cut him. He's not going to make the team. Maybe will be a practice squad guy or be a backup somewhere else. But Blah Nichols, player I like. Sean Murphy-Bunting, it's a cool signing. But really there's just not much here. Mac Wilson, player I really love as a Browns fan. But he's a decent linebacker. It's just, it's nothing big. You didn't really bring in anything big. Obviously, Kyler's going to be healthy, and Marv is your first round pick. So there's a lot of upside there. But overall, it's just going to be a C plus for me. You really didn't lose too much. Like nothing at all. DJ Humphries, like, okay, Rondale Moore you got rid of, and then obviously you lose Marquise Brown, but you're rebuilding. And was Marquise Brown really part of the future? I don't really think so. So yeah, it's just gonna be a C plus, a whole lot of nothing for me in the Arizona Cardinals. Moving on to the LA Rams. Aaron Donald retired. That sucks for this team. And I think a big problem with this team that's going to continue is that they're pretty old. They really didn't lose much else. Jordan Fuller was actually a really key player on the defensive side of the ball for them for a while. But they really didn't lose much else. They're just going to continue to be pretty old and have some injury problems. At the end of the day, I'm going to give them a B minus. I think Jimmy G is like a pretty good signing as a backup. Like with how the injuries have been going for Matt Stafford at the back end of his career, I think that Jimmy G could be a serviceable quarterback that could get him through a couple weeks if Matt Stafford has to sit out. And I don't mind the move. Re-signing DeMarcus Robinson, he was a little sneaky last year. I do like that move. Jonah Jackson, I think it's a really good guard signing. He's a Buckeye, and I really like him, and he's been really good for the Lions over the course of his career. Darius Williams, pretty good signing. Cameron Curl, I love that signing a lot. So you're losing out on Jordan Fuller, a 7th round guy who has made a big impact on your organization, and you're bringing in Cam Curl, who's a 6th round guy who has also been pretty good in his time in the league. So I like that replacement. Overall, gonna give him a B minus. They just didn't do too much, but I think that they're gonna maintain that solid roster where they're older, but they still could make some noise. Moving on to the San Francisco 49ers, the champions of the NFC last year. I'm going to give them a B minus. Now, they lost a lot of key defensive guys. Eric Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, Chase Young, Randy Gregory, Cleveland Farrell, not really. But their defense definitely is going to take a hit, especially on the line this year. Obviously, you still have Nick Bosa, but it's going to take a hit. Like, the defensive line is not going to look as dominant as it has in the past. You bring in Ricky Pearsall, which is okay, I think, in the first round. He's a good player for sure. I just don't know how much of the field he's going to see, especially if Brandon Ayuk is back. Now, he's going to be the third receiver, Ricky Pearsall is, but your main guys are Debo and Brandon Ayuk and George Kittle, so you're going to prioritize getting the ball to them a lot. Now, bringing back Christian McCaffrey for a 2-year extension is about the best thing you could have done in this offseason. I think it saves the offseason for them. Malik Collins, good player to bring in to replace some of those defensive line struggles. Leonard Floyd, like, they brought in some decent players. To Jordan Elliott, I like a lot. They brought in some decent players to kind of fill those gaps of players they lost. they're nowhere near the types of players that those guys are. I think Rock Ya-Sin's a good signing for them. He's going to be a slot corner probably for them. But yeah, overall, just not crazy offseason. Seahawks are our final team of the day, and I'm going to finish them off with a pretty average offseason with a B. You know, they did good. They lose Jamal Adams, Quandre Diggs, Bobby Wagner is super old, Devin Bush. So they lost some decent players on the defensive side of the ball, nothing really on the offensive side of the ball. But they bring in a guy like Jerome Baker, who I absolutely love. A super sick signing for them. They re-signed Leonard Williams, which was super crucial to their offseason. They pick up a backup quarterback in Sam Howell. Again, didn't do too much, but did enough to stay competitive in the division. I think that they're going to be, again, the second or third best team in the division. But they're going to stay competitive. They're going to fight for that playoff spot. I think they definitely could have done more to push themselves over a hump. But at the end of the day, Geno Smith is just getting older. Still not like a really great quarterback in this league. He's good, for sure. But how far can Geno Smith really get you? I don't think very far. But yeah, so that's it. That's it for my off-season rankings videos. Let me know what you guys think. What you agree with, what you disagree with. Obviously, my opinions aren't right. They're just my opinions. But I did have a lot of fun going over these teams. Like I said at the beginning of the video, I'm going to be releasing some more content as the NFL season approaches. So yeah, look out for a prediction video. I'm thinking about doing like a potential Hall of Famer video. I've got some ideas locked up in here. So yeah, if you enjoyed the video, please leave it a like. Maybe give me a comment. Let me know what you thought, what I could do better, what you liked about the video. I really appreciate it. Yeah, but I'm really enjoying this, and I'm excited for the NFL season to finally be on your way. So yeah.